Welcome back, and nice promptness. So our next stretch of time before lunch, we're going to be talking about municipal revenue. We don't control municipal revenue for the most part at the state level. Municipalities often raise their own revenue, and so we don't talk about it that much in Ways and Means. But what happens throughout the session is we have a lot of things that intersect with municipal revenue. We'll talk about TIFs likely. We'll talk about local option taxes. We'll talk about how this education property tax might affect municipal property taxes. And so in order to just sort of set the stage for those smaller conversations, which I think we sometimes take in isolation, I'm hoping to just spend the morning thinking more deeply about how municipalities receive their revenue, create revenue, generate revenue, and then where the state is involved or not involved. There are too many witnesses in this block of time, and that is absolutely on me. And so we're just going to make our way through it and see how well it works out. But it's like, this is really just an opportunity to jumpstart a conversation that we'll be having over and over throughout the session. So with that, Tucker, Abby, Becky, the floor is yours. I don't know how you want to use it.
Well, good morning, everyone. Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel. For those of you who don't know me, I work primarily with municipal law, municipal charters, and dabble in liquor and lottery, which are also subject areas that I work on. And I know some of you from work that we've done in the past, but great to meet any of you that I haven't worked with before. So this morning, we'll work through a presentation that Abby, Becky, and I put together just to give you a general idea of what some of the sources of municipal revenue are. And I'm going to start by giving you an overview of municipal authority and a general understanding of why statute in particular matters so much to municipal authority and how municipalities can raise revenue.
And just for everyone, that is under Abby's name on our webpage, and if you can't find it, refresh. Back to you, Tucker.
So the first slide that we'll move to is titled Municipal Authority and Dillon's Rule, which is maybe a scary name that you've heard in the past during debates on the House floor. To give you a general idea, the Vermont Constitution doesn't vest municipalities with any explicit power. The General Assembly instead is granted authority over municipalities. That includes the creation and alteration of municipalities and the ability to grant charters of incorporation. And it has this clause that follows that says that municipal corporations as are to be and remain under the patronage and control of the state. And the Vermont Supreme Court in about a dozen decisions has said that this means that Vermont is what's known as a pure Dillon's Rule state, which means that if the General Assembly does not explicitly grant a municipality authority, it doesn't have it. And that extends to things like taxes and fees. Municipal authority is also subject to strict construction, which means that whatever is not, quote, unequivocally granted to a municipality is assumed to have been withheld. Important when you're working with the statutes that grant authority for things like local option taxes, etc. Give you a brief idea of the fees that are available as a source of revenue for municipalities. These are primarily going to be things like recording fees, the issuance of certain licenses. I gave some examples in the slide. Things like the recording of real property records. This extends from everything to the recording of a deed, to survey plats, to certain Act 250 documents that need to be recorded. In general, these recording fees are about $10 to $15 per page, depending on the record, and primarily funds the town clerk's office, and specifically is a source of income for the town clerk. Not all of those fees go directly to the officer or to the municipality, and some of them have to be set aside in what's known as a preservation and reservation fund for future digitization and archiving of these real property records. Similarly, first, second, and standalone third-class licenses for alcoholic beverages. The municipality gets a share of those, but some does go elsewhere outside of the municipality. Same theme for dog and wolf hybrid licenses. There's a discretionary amount that a town can charge above the statutory rate. Some of that goes to the town, some of it goes to the statewide rabies program. Municipalities can apply zoning and development review fees, impact fees, and certain building inspection fees. I don't know the extent to which that is a meaningful source of revenue for municipalities, or whether it just covers the costs of actually carrying out those functions. And finally, there are a few instances where municipal utilities can charge fees associated with the provision of the service from the utility, connection fees, things like that.
And all municipalities have the same ability to assess the fees, or are there different category? Like, are some municipalities eligible to offer some things that others aren't?
Excellent question, Representative Sims. That depends on their charter. So if the municipality is operating under general law, then the general statutes in Title 24 for the most part, sometimes Title 32 if we're talking about recording fees, are set in the statute. You can't deviate from them. Some municipalities that are using more sophisticated systems have charter provisions that allow them to deviate or provide different fees. There's a recent proposal from the city of Burlington to assess carbon impact fees, for example.
So I'm hearing you say a municipality can change their charter to give them additional ability to assess fees. It does have to be approved by the legislature, but.
Correct. So that would have been the one edit that I would say the General Assembly can amend the municipality's charter to give them discretion in the application of a fee. And that's it from me.
Thank you. Oh, I have a question for you, actually. Does county government have any ability to assess fees or raise revenue?
I don't know about county fees. I know that they do have some authority to raise county taxes, and that is set by the assistant judge. The county budget has to be presented and voted on by the voters of the county, but the assistant judge does set the county budget and can raise a tax.
And when they raise a tax, who pays the tax?
Residents of the county.
Thank you. Sorry to keep playing musical chairs. There are three of us at Legislative Council will be presenting this today, so we'll just keep swapping out as our slides come up.
I think it's kind of fun.
Great. It's keeping us on our toes. So for the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel, I'm going to walk you through some of the property tax sources of municipal revenue, as well as local option tax. I'm focusing on the tax side. Under statute in Title 17, at an annual meeting or a special meeting that's specifically warned for this purpose, a town is, oh, I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead to local option tax. Oops, sorry. For property tax, I'm on slide 4. At an annual meeting, a town is required to vote either the specific amount of money to be raised or the actual tax rate on each dollar of the property tax grand list to be appropriated for laying out and repairing highways and for other necessary town expenses. If a town does vote a specific amount instead of an actual tax rate, then the select board will do the calculation and set that rate. Statute requires a town's budget to be necessary for the interest of its inhabitants and for the prosecution and defense of the common rights. So this is the basic authority that gives towns to raise a property tax, which is kind of, if not the most significant source of revenues for municipalities. Within the property tax area, there is state aid that is paid to municipalities. This is more in the education property tax, so the state property tax area, because municipalities do administer valuation, appraisals, maintaining the grand list. There are certain
fees and percentages that are paid to towns to compensate them for the work that they do on behalf of the state to administer the state property tax. Two of those are listed here, the main sources of revenues. There's two different areas in the statute that allow municipalities, when they remit their education property tax to either the state or directly to a school district, they're allowed to retain 0.225% of the property tax that has been collected. Additionally, there are several different areas in statute in Title 32 where towns are paid per parcel fees for each grand list parcel.
I'm sorry, does the per grand list parcel fee, does that have a function within towns or is it just going to their general fund?
There are two different fees and they're both related to the reappraisal
Okay,
appraisals. There are some, I'm sorry, I don't have the statutory language in front of me, but each has a slightly different purpose. A few years ago, the legislature did require, I believe it was one of those fees or both of those fees to be held in a separate fund so that it can be accounted for within town revenues. Okay, so that's all I prepared for the property tax side. The next area where towns are able to raise revenue, which you're all, I'm sure, well aware of, are local option taxes. So the local option tax statute in Title 24 was enacted at the time of Act 60 when the state education property tax was enacted. And it sets out the ways that a town may enact a local option tax, as well as what types of sales can be subject to the tax and the administration of the tax. So I'm going to try and keep it fairly high level, but feel free to ask any specific questions you have. So this is where it's at either the annual meeting or a special meeting warned for that purpose. Towns may put to a vote of their voters the question of whether or not to impose a 1% local option tax on sales that are already subject to one of the state taxes that I have listed. This is slide 6. So it does split it out. It's sales tax, meals tax, rooms tax, and alcoholic beverages tax. So some towns have only a local option sales tax, some have meals and rooms, some have alcoholic beverages. Typically, meals and rooms, alcoholic beverages tend to go together. Yes?
Do some towns have a local option on fuel?
Not under this statute. Not to my knowledge. But that's a good question. I don't know if there are other federal requirements. Are you by any chance referring to aviation jet fuel? Because that's specifically called out in this statute, and I could talk about that if you want me to detail. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So this no longer requires a charter change?
So it does, sorry, I'm looking at Tucker. So the town has to vote to impose the tax. Often it's through a charter, and then that comes to the legislature to approve it so that it is enacted in the statute. I don't know if you have anything to add.
So
Tucker.
you said often is there times when it doesn't require a charter?
The section that Abby's talking about has a statutory limitation on the municipalities that qualify to vote for local option tax without a charter. There are some 40, potentially maybe more municipalities that qualify under the calculations. Every other municipality in the state that doesn't qualify has to adopt a charter provision in order to have a local option tax.
Can you just explain who qualifies and who doesn't?
There are some sophisticated calculations in 3 subdivisions, and it's based on the revenue of towns from 1997 to 1999, and potentially their grand list value. I'm looking at Abby's tracks. And these were towns that were disadvantaged by the shift in the education property tax, statewide education property tax. They
In the
were
Act
losing
60.
municipal revenue, so it was an opportunity for them to replace revenue they received through their property taxes with a local option tax.
Okay.
And we will have an opportunity to talk in greater depth about the local option tax this session.
Don't want to drone on and on. I can forward the statutory language and then we can get into more. It is a slightly complicated calculation, and as Tucker mentioned, it did that was enacted with Act 60. Different towns were affected differently. I also neglected to mention that the cities of Burlington and Rutland do actually administer their own local option property taxes that predated Act 60. The way that the local option tax is paid and collected, it's the vendors in the case of sales tax, or the operators or restaurants for meals and rooms and alcoholic beverages tax. They collect it on the sale at the same, under the same circumstances they would be collecting the state taxes. They remit it to the Vermont Department of Taxes, and the Vermont Department of Taxes deals with the all of the administration of the tax and then distributes the revenues. So towns are not involved until they're receiving the revenues. And also what I didn't note, might be too much in the weeds, but when a town has enacted its local option tax, it does have to give the department, I believe it's a 90-day notice under statute. So the department's aware they will have another town that they will be administering these taxes for. In terms of how much revenue towns are getting and what is happening to the revenue once it reaches the Department of Taxes after it's been collected, there is a $5.96 fee that is paid to the department for the cost of administration and collection. That is paid 70% by the town. I'm sorry, I'm on slide 7, the town where the tax was collected. And then 30% is paid by the state payment in lieu of taxes, the pilot special fund. That's that administrative fee that's scooped off the top of the revenues that are going to the department. It's per return. And then after that per return fee has come out, the revenue is then split 70% to the town where it was collected and 30% goes to the pilot fund. As I started to allude to, I just want to point out there is an exception for aviation jet fuel, and that's because of federal requirements where it can only be used for specific purposes. Otherwise, when a municipality receives local option tax revenues, there is statutory limit to how it can be used for municipal services only, not for education. So it is not allowed to be used for state education, town education. And that is the extent of the taxing side. If there are any questions, otherwise I'll turn it over to Becky to talk to you about debt.
Thank you.
Do you want me to leave my computer?
Welcome.
Hi, Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel. So I'm not really going to talk about, I guess, revenue raising in the traditional sense, but I wanted to add a couple slides on, I guess I would categorize this as ways municipalities can raise money to pay for some of the things they need. So on slide 8, debt incurrence, this ties into the next topic I will talk about and also to the property taxes. So a municipality can incur debt, and typically when we say that, we mean that they will issue a bond to fund a public improvement having to do with construction or renovation on a building or purchasing an asset or sidewalks, septic systems, things like that. And when a municipality wants to issue a bond, it requires voter approval for that bond. And there are some limits in statute about how much they can incur that's based on their grand list. And a municipality has to pay back the debt that they've taken out. And that is done through interest and principal payments out of their operating budget. And so this is where, they need to raise money to pay for that through like property taxes. Any questions on that?
When people refer to the grand list, they mean it as not divided by 100, is that correct?
Look at it.
There's the total value divided by 100, and that is the grand list.
So the grand list is what the town is valuing each property and setting it in. That's what the town has to base their tax on.
And it's the full value.
Is the full value,
Okay.
yes. So there is a whole process to then move it to the state grand list, which is different and it's equalized, but there's no differentiation.
Equalized by the CLA or equalized by,
That's a great question. No, that's pre-CLA. So the grand list is the value, the CLA applies to the tax rate, so it's not,
Yeah.
There's a whole equalization study that does lead to the CLA, but that is separate from when you're looking at, here's the grand list, this is how much tax base a town has to base its property tax on.
okay. So when it talks about a percent of the grand list, that's the percent of the total assessed value of the property within that we're talking about.
Yeah, in statute that is relating to the municipalities.
Okay,
Grand list.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, so starting on slide 9, I'm going to turn to TIF, and I've attempted to explain TIFs in 2 slides, but I imagine that I will be back to talk to this committee more about it.
And we already have an agenda item.
Okay.
Tax expenditures where we
Okay.
talk about TIF, and then I'm sure, yes, there will be other opportunities to talk about TIF.
Okay, so just very high level, TIF is an economic development tool that uses both municipal bonding or issuing debt and property taxes. And it's a way that a municipality can borrow money to invest in a new infrastructure, like some of the things I mentioned before, like sidewalks. And the idea is that infrastructure will stimulate private development to happen in an area where it otherwise would not have occurred. And the combination of both that public and private investment will then eventually increase property taxes and revenues for a municipality. And so on the last slide, I've just overly simplified how a TIF works. So for what happens is that a municipality that has an approved TIF district is approved to retain for a 20-year period some of their property tax revenue to repay the borrowed funds that the funds that they've borrowed. And they do this by splitting their tax revenue, their property tax revenue. So they are essentially able to keep the property tax revenue that existed prior to that development. So they sort of freeze it at that original level. And then they use the portion of the increase in the property tax values to repay their infrastructure debt. And that we call the increment. For most TIF districts, there were some that have different sort of calculations and formulas for how they retain increment. Up to Vermont, the state allows a municipality to retain 70% of their education property tax increment to repay debt, and the remaining 30% goes to the ed fund. And then they can use not less than 85% of their municipal property tax revenue to repay that debt. And then at the end of that retention period, the idea is that the municipality and the state then receive the full amounts of their property tax revenues. So it's just for that period of time that they can keep the education and municipal property tax increments.
Becky, how is that increment calculated?
Like who does the calculation, or it's primarily based on these 70-30%, and I think I have to check statute, but I think the way it is that the municipality has to have a special account where they hold the TIF revenues, they hold it apart, and then they figure out how to send it either to the ed fund or keep it for the TIF.
So is it calculated based on the previous year's tax revenue, or?
I think it's set, the TIF district is like set, it's like April 1st of the year in which the district is created. So the original taxable value is based on sort of April 1st of that year. I don't remember off the top of my head when they recalculate the increment every year, but I can get back to you on that.
There's all kinds of vagaries around how the properties are valued and how
Right.
that changes, and we will,
Hence my
have some
question.
time to dive into that, yeah.
This must be my theme today, but am I correct in saying that certain municipalities are eligible to access a TIF or available for all?
So VEPSI oversees the TIF approval process,
Do you know what VEPSI stands for?
Non-Economic Progress Council,
I think so.
I think.
That's.
So they, so if a municipality wanted to apply to have a TIF district, there's an application process that they go through Betsy. The legislature decided a few years ago to limit the number of TIFs that are still available. Obviously, the legislature can change that number, but I think there were 6 put in statute and then 2 were approved. So I think there are maybe 4 left, but we'll have to double check that.
Just the rub in Ways and Means has been that TIF districts are in a sense paid for out of the education fund. So there's been a squabbling, no, that's just the right word. Scuttlebutt in here, discussion about that.
Or squabbling. Yeah.
Well,
other
I mean,
perspectives.
It's actually felt more like scuttlebutt than squabbling. I experience, actually.
But a tool that has been available for certain communities and there's a limited window.
Yep.
Take note.
Anything else?
No, I think that was it unless there are any more questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Emily Byrne, you're next up. Please refresh to get Emily.
Yes, so my presentation was a little late.
You're all doing the very best we can.
How I'm feeling. So for the record, Emily Byrne from the Joint Fiscal Office. Chair Kornheiser asked me to come in and kind of do a real high-level overview of municipal funds or funds that run from the state to municipalities. So put together a little presentation on some of them. And I should say that big, like bold letters, put a disclaimer at the front of the PowerPoint. This is some of them. So JFO hasn't really been asked to do this before. And I will probably put this on a list of things we may do over the summer, but pulled together, did a poll of JFO and kind of pulled together some of the bigger pieces of funds that move from the state to municipalities. But this is not meant to be a sort of full accounting of all of the dollars that are moving between the two, just sort of a general high-level overview of some of the places where the state is sending money to the towns or there's a relationship there. So if you jump to slide 4 is where I'll start. So in the Appropriations Act, there are 4 appropriations for the pilot appropriation. Pilot is payment in lieu of taxes. So the state does not pay property taxes. Property is not on the grand list and don't have to remit property taxes or school taxes to towns. So in lieu of that, to sort of recognize that certain towns have property that is effectively carved out of their property tax base or their land base because the state is occupying it, the state sends funds to those towns. There are 3 that are sort of in the general government section paid for out of the pilot fund. Those are the first 3 listed. So the payment in lieu of taxes, that one covers all of the towns except Montpelier, who gets its own line item in the budget bill. And then the correctional facilities have their own line item in the budget bill. I can find out the history of that, but that's historically how they've been presented. And then down in the Agency of Natural Resources section of the budget, there is an appropriation for payment in lieu of taxes for land owned by the Agency of Natural Resources, mostly Department of Forest and Parks and Rec and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And those funds come mostly from the general fund to those towns. The next one that's in the budget, sort of in the same section of the budget as the pilot payments, is the municipal current use payment. So the state appropriates funds to essentially make towns whole for municipal current use. So when a property is enrolled in current use, its assessed value is changed based on its enrollment in current use, and sort of that difference in the assessed value and the associated property taxes are covered by the state to make up that difference for the towns. I'll note there's no commensurate appropriation in the education fund. To the extent those properties have a lower assessed value because of current use, there is nothing to sort of make up that in the education fund. So it's made up by the fund as a whole. I'm going to try to do less. Becky had 2 slides on TIF. I've got 1 slide on TIF. We will definitely be back to talk more about TIF, but wanted to just put a little bit of dollars to the amount, the increment that gets retained. As Becky alluded to, municipalities can retain up to 70% of the education property tax. It's a little different for some of the older TIFs. The e-board adopts that tax impact annually. So it will be updated on Tuesday at the e-board meeting. The last year, that increment that was adopted, the assumed funds that don't flow to the education fund that the towns get to retain to pay back the debt service in the for the work done in those TIF districts is about 6.7 million. And there are currently 10 TIF districts in the state. 2 of them are in Burlington, but they're 2 separate districts. Local option taxes, as Abby spoke about, again at a high level, towns can impose the 1% local option tax. Looking at the tax department, this is sort of a summary of the number of towns that currently have local option taxes. This is not additive. There are some towns that have both the local option sales tax and the meals and goods tax. So this is just a count of each of those. I think we did a quick calculation. Someone correct me if I get it wrong, but it was about $20 million of local option tax last year. Another area where funds run, I'm on slide 8 now, on the clean water and drinking water state revolving funds. So this is a program, it's a federal program. It's been around for a couple decades, I believe, but the federal government provides grants to the states to support municipal investments in drinking water and stormwater projects. Clean water is sewer mostly, and other clean water projects. But the state has to provide 20% match. The federal government provides 80% match. And it's a mechanism for states to loan dollars to municipalities at very low or 0% interest rates. So they don't have to go to the private market to bond for drinking water, wastewater programs. And they pay back, they set up a schedule like you would with any loan. They pay back the state for those funds, and then the state is able to revolve them back out and reloan them to municipalities for new projects. I should have caveated this whole presentation. I did not go into ARPA or CARES Act or IIJA very much on this. That is a whole other, given that that is sort of a one-time event, did not go into the details of all of those. We'd be happy to pull some stuff together if that's helpful.
I believe that Katie Buckley from the league is going to go into that a little bit.
Did not go down that road. But there was some enhancements in the IIJA to the clean water and stormwater revolving fund match availability. So if you look in the capital bill, you'll see the state match for those programs. Yeah. The next slide, so on slide 9, we talked to Chris Roop in our office to get a high level overview of some of the transportation fund dollars that are available to municipalities. The big one is the town highway aid, which is the formula paid based on mileage of roads. About $27.8 million in 23 was appropriated. The next big one is sort of grants for class 2 roadway projects, about $7.2 million in 23. And then there's lots of other sort of grant programs through the Agency of Transportation for bridges, disaster assistance, stormwater and erosion control that comes through the Clean Water Fund, equipment revolving funds, planning grants, grants for bike ped type work. That's sort of the transportation space.
I'm always wondering, when it says town highway aid, which do municipalities get any aid for their roads?
That is what this, I think, is that your question?
Well,
it depends on the class of the road, I believe.
Because once you're in a town and there's a street that somebody lives on, and those are not town highways, those are.
I'm not sure, I'm not the transportation expert. So
We can,
I missed
if we are gonna go deeper into that, we can, but for instance, in Brattleboro, the majority of our main roads, even in our downtown, are town highway roads. I don't, and I think the funding for them works a little differently, but they are, I think there are a lot of towns and especially villages where they have town highways running through them as their main roads.
So all those are 27.8 million.
Yes, it's the state, what the state provides for us. And then the last slide, just a high level. So there are lots of other state grant programs that run to municipalities. We didn't have enough time to sort of dig through all of them, but that's something we're happy to dig through if that would be useful. Get the appropriations folks looking at that and pulling some numbers together. Also flagged, Abby spoke about some of the administrative fees that to the extent the towns are doing work to collect property taxes on behalf of the state, they're allowed to they get to keep an administrative fee. Similarly, towns remit their education property taxes to the state on set dates throughout the year. To the extent they can collect those revenues, they're allowed to keep the interest on those revenues until they're remitted to the state. Sort of more help for doing the administration of that. And then similarly, there are other sort of indirect ways that funds kind of move to municipalities, and you flagged the downtown and village center tax credit as one, and we'll talk more about that when we do the tax expenditure report, but as a way to incentivize folks to make investment in downtowns, and municipalities sort of indirectly benefit from that depending on changes in assessed values or just general economic improvements from having improvements in your downtown.
Representative Brannigan has a question and then Representative Sims.
She partially answered my question, interest on the ed property tax. There's some confusion in my town because there's a belief there's a limit on how much interest the town can earn and keep. Is there a limit on that, or is it only the limit that the bank sets?
I'm not sure. I will get back to you on that.
Okay.
On the amount of interest the town can retain?
Yes. So one of the last couple of speakers mentioned that there's a chunk of money coming into the town office from that property tax for schools, and the town office keeps it. For the most part, we're a town where we would get more money from the state, so we would keep what's paid within our municipality. And that money is invested somehow, but there's a limit on how much of the interest the town can keep. And I don't know what, something
That's a good
like
question.
2% or something.
And I was thinking with just putting this together, I was more thinking about the towns that would remit money back to the state that have those set payments, but then there's also the money that goes right town to the district and what happens there. I can find out on that.
Letting the thought be captured.
Thank you.
I don't know if you're the right person to ask this, but I guess I'd be curious to sort of like map and sort of understand who's taking advantage of some of these programs that have more limited use. Like, could we get the list of the communities that are currently TIFs or that have had a TIF, and would love to see sort of who's using the local option taxes.
I think when we talk about TIFs, we'll have a list of who has TIFs, and when we talk about local options, we will talk about who else has local options.
Great. And one last related question, and maybe this is too complicated, but like also just curious around the like UVA program. You know, we're making whole towns, do we ever track that at a kind of town by town level of what the total reimbursement to each community is for parcels that are enrolled in UVA?
Yes, I think A&R definitely has, this is how much each town was given, and what the A&R pilot calculation is a little, I hate to use the word wonky, but it's a little, it got updated a couple of years ago. They definitely have that, and then there's definitely, we can get a.
Yeah, if you could help point me to that.
Yeah,
I think that's in a report that we get regularly.
I think so. I would give a shout out. The tax department has a really great thing on local option tax on their website. If you'd like, that gives you all the towns and that stuff. Quickly, we'll bring it to you, but if you want to quickly find it.
I'm wondering about a list for municipal current use. Is that on a website also?
Lisa, I think it's in the same report that the chair was referring to.
Okay. Say the name of that report again when you're ready.
Don't know off the top of my head. Can't remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
Is it in the PBR report? Okay, we'll figure it out. I'll get it to you.
Good, thank you very much.
Yes.
Thanks for big picturing with us.
Totally, anytime. And if there's other, specific stuff that we can help look into, happy to do that. Cool.
And next up, we have Commissioner Bolio and Deputy Commissioner Samaroff.
Long time no see.
Any final report?
Craig Bolio, Town Commissioner, for the record. I'm happy to try to answer one of your questions from earlier, Rep. Canfield. So there is local option tax on any fuel that is subject to sales tax, right? But that wouldn't necessarily be like residential heating fuel or gasoline. So it would be like commercial use. And there's no local option tax on the fuel tax for those kind of deliveries. Does that make sense? Or answer your question? Okay, thank you. So thanks for having me on this. I'm going to talk a little about what the department does to administer local option tax, and also some recent challenges that we've been having and where we feel that there's a gap in the statute that we're hopeful this committee will consider as part of the technical changes for the tax department that I think we're going to jump into in full detail next week. But to try not to repeat what you heard from Abby too much, towns can vote to enact a 1% local option tax on sales, meals and alcohol, and or rooms in their municipality. It requires a local vote, and it often requires approval from the legislature to either approve a change in a charter or creation of a charter. It's only a limited number of towns were authorized with Act 62 enact a lot on their own. A lot is collected by businesses at the time that a transaction that's subject to the sales tax or meals, rooms, and alcohol tax is collected, and the business remits that to the department. And the department in turn processes those payments, reviews the tax returns with them, and issues the local option tax money to the municipalities. The department is compensated in statute by a $5.96 per return fee that is charged per lot municipality on each return. 70% of that lot revenue, less the fees, goes to the towns, and the other 30% is deposited into the pilot fund.
Do we have whatever you're reading from?
No, but it's just my notes, but I could send you something if that's helpful.
Only if that works for you.
Sure. So here's what we do each time a lot town comes on board. And it does require 90 days in statute to give us time to do what I'm about to describe. So we first send correspondence to every business in the town that the lot is becoming active in, and every adjacent town, because sales tax is a destination-based tax. And we also send correspondence to any business that collects local option taxes in more than one jurisdiction. And really what we're trying to capture there are e-commerce businesses, utility companies that may not have a local address in that jurisdiction but need to know about a local option tax somewhere in the state. And that correspondence outlines what local option taxes are, how they impact you, how to get help if you have questions, how to file, what the effective dates are, all that kind of stuff to try to lay out what's going to happen for them. We update our tax systems and our forms, and we also update a rate and boundary file with the streamlined sales tax agreement that tries to help businesses, especially national businesses, understand what the local boundaries are in Vermont. So there's a lot of work. And we also have a cool rate finder tool on our website where you can look up any address in the state and it tells you what lot jurisdiction it's in. But I don't want to steal all of Rebecca's thunder. But despite all of that and our best efforts, right, tax collection is never perfect, right? And because all of these are collected by businesses, there is always the risk and the reality that some share of businesses are not collecting it correctly. Either they are in the lot jurisdiction or delivering to the lot jurisdiction and they're not collecting it, or they are not in that lot jurisdiction and they are accidentally collecting it. And we have to work with those businesses to make sure that they get corrected. And this has occurred since lot started. But traditionally, it has been fairly limited in scope, right? Before the boom of online commerce, a lot of this stuff was brick and mortar, so it was less about delivery. And we would get early notification of when there was a problem and we could fix it, and it wasn't necessarily material. Both as more lot jurisdictions are coming on and we see the boom in e-commerce, it's becoming more and more challenging to ensure that all of the businesses are doing it correctly. And I'm going to have Rebecca show an example of how this is challenging, but really the big gap that we see in statute right now is that it is not clear what should happen with money that is incorrectly collected in a municipality that is not authorized to collect a local option tax. So for instance, the city of Essex Junction enacted a local option tax that started this October. If a business in the town accidentally collected local option tax, it's not clear in statute what should happen with that money. Our preference that we are hopeful that the legislature would undertake is that the state would retain that money as it would with ordinary sales tax and stand ready, which we are today and authorized are today, to refund that money to any customer who comes forward and says that they were incorrectly charged and can prove that. We traditionally ask taxpayers to start by going to the business that it was incorrectly collected from. And often businesses are able and willing to help with that process. But you can imagine cases where they can't or they won't. And so I will say in statute now, we are authorized to refund any money that is incorrectly collected from the customers, because remember, sales tax and therefore local option tax and meals tax are collected from customers, not businesses. But it's not clear what should happen in the interim with that money. And so our hope is that it would be retained by my department so we could stand ready to make those refunds as customers come forward. And if knowing that not every dollar will get refunded, despite, again, our best efforts, that would be treated like ordinary sales tax revenue. I'm happy to take any questions there, but we also have like a really tangible example that I'm going to have Rebecca walk through about like how challenging this can be.
I don't see any questions, and imagine that we're going to have the team from TaxBack to talk when we talk about property valuation and review. That'll also be another opportunity to talk about the intersection between town revenue and state revenue.
Yeah, for sure.
Great, thank you.
I'll swap.
And folks, there is a document under Rebecca's name on our website that is very cool.
Yeah, indeed. Rebecca Samroth, Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Taxes. Before we look at the document, or everyone, taking the cool document, but I just wanted to start by some context, which is that locating your customer's delivery address if you're a business, or in some cases even locating the physical address of your business, is way more complicated than you might imagine. And when I talk about the physical address, I'm not saying like Capitol Grounds doesn't know where it is, but like, the mothership of a big national chain may not have accurate information about what jurisdiction their local sites are falling in Vermont. And we're seeing both of these issues from where we sit at the tax department. I joked about Capitol Grounds, but honestly, nothing would surprise me at this point. And you'll understand when you look at these maps that I have attached under my name. Let me pull one of these up too. So, for matters where you're thinking about where you are in relation to a town, it seems natural to look to the US Postal Service and that address information for guidance. And it turns out that that can be really misleading in the context of local option tax administration and correct compliance. So this first map that I have here, these are, and I should say these maps were helpfully created for me by the Vermont Center for Geographic Information, VCGI. Their name will come up a lot in my anecdotes here because they've been a huge help for the tax department. But I would be, like a map from VCGI is usually like 80 times cooler than this. So this is very much hampered by the existence of USPS limitations. So hopefully you guys will have a chance to hear from them at some point and see what they can really do with their mapping skills. But looking at this first map, you see these points are colored based on the USPS provided town on an address. So you can see very clearly these black boundaries are actual municipalities in Vermont, some of which have local option taxes. And then the colored dots show the town names that USPS is giving these municipalities. So you might put together by looking at this that Middlesex doesn't exist for the USPS. So that's sad for those of us that know and love Middlesex. There's also Eastbury and Southbury, but certainly no Berry City or Berry Town, which are jurisdictions that, are kind of like in a donut-like relationship to each other. And the city has a sales and use local option tax and the town does not. So this kind of gets at why it can be really complicated for even folks on the ground to know where they are. Some might think that the longer 9-digit zip code could provide a solution to that. And if you flip to the next page, you can see that these points are each geocoded 9-digit zip codes, and you can see that they do very nicely fall within town boundaries. The issue is that USPS doesn't update town names based on these 9-digit zips that do fall within town boundaries. It's only updated at the big zip code level. So while it's possible to say like, oh yes, this set of 9-digit zip codes is within Middlesex, all of the addresses associated with those will say either Montpelier or East Montpelier or Moortown or Waterbury, depending on where they fall in this first map. Another characteristic of 9-digit zip codes is that they change periodically, not infrequently, and with a lot of like mystery associated with it. Turns out I'm learning a lot about the post office this year, and I just always assumed zip codes were about where you are in space, and it turns out it's about how packages move through our postal system. Yeah. So all news to me. Maybe some of you have experience with this, but this is about like the efficient movement of mail and not about where you are in geographical space. So a little digression, all to say that this is kind of the landscape we're working with around local option tax compliance. So like what is a taxpayer, much less the tax department, to do when these are the common tools? Luckily, we've have this very cool project with the Vermont Center of Geographic Information. They helped us create a local option tax rate finder on our website, which can be accessed. It's actually one of the highlighted banner items on our homepage, but if you just search for local option tax, it'll come right up on our website. And this is a tool for both taxpayers and for our own tax examiners to be able to identify which correct Vermont jurisdiction any address falls in. So it's a very easy tool to use. VCGI also helps us update a rate and boundary file that Craig mentioned that lives on the Streamlined Sales Tax Alliance website. They compile these boundary and rate files from all their member states. So like bigger companies like large e-commerce vendors might go directly to Streamline and program those files into their software. So, tax is correctly being applied every time they send out a delivery. Or there's also a whole host of third-party vendors who will consume these files and do the same service and then contract their services out to other vendors. This is a relatively new project for us at the tax department because we actually used to have a third-party vendor do this for us. They subsequently got out of the space and now actually consume our boundary file that they used to create. But now VCGI supports us in making this boundary file in-house, and the quality has been vastly improved. We found a lot of issues in the old one. But these are kind of the two main tools we have to support taxpayers and also support our own work reviewing returns, catching issues, and compliance work at the department.
So how does all of this confusion turn into either a problem or a solution?
Well, I think the solutions, I'm happy to say, are these, two tools that are absolutely helping folks find the answers they need about what local option tax jurisdiction, their delivery or their, physical presence is in. I think, the continued challenge is making sure that folks have access to them. So we've been certainly pushing out this information in all of our outreach, especially around the new local option tax jurisdictions that just came out online in October. The Berrytown, Berry City boundary is now very significant, and a lot of people have been using these tools to correctly locate themselves. Our tax examiners have been as well. And then also the recent creation of the city of Essex Junction, you can imagine, creates like a whole new host of complexity there, because not only is it a boundary, but it's a brand new one. First new town in 200 years.
So just doesn't, like, that means like Amazon needs to know whether a specific address in the city or Berrytown and update. And are folks of that size and scale using your tool to?
I think folks of that scale are certainly not like going onto our website and looking up one address at a time. But the beauty of I'm saying this now, like rolling my eyes massively inside, because there's a lot of issues with this streamlined boundary file too, but mostly just because of its reliance on USPS data. But the beauty of that file is that it's like, it's a big, massive file that folks with, basic programming knowledge, like folks that work at large e-retailers, can just consume in their systems pretty easily. And we have plenty of evidence of people doing it right, which was very fun for us to see, October 1st, checking with the third party vendors like Avalara, for example, is a third-party vendor that we used to work with at the department, and now they provide these services to other businesses, and they are certainly a Streamline approved vendor, and we could see, like, right from their website that they were correctly identifying locations in Berry City versus Berrytown, or Essex Junction, the city versus the town of Essex. So, yes.
And the small jewelry maker in Oregon who sells something online, like how do they discover that there's a local option tax in Berry City and that there's an amazing file or a tool that they could use? Yeah,
so by going onto our website, that they can find that's like a perfect candidate for our manual lookup tool. Like, I have one delivery in Vermont, let's see what's going on. I don't think there's nothing like unique about Vermont having a local option tax. This is very like a common situation across the country for municipalities to have local taxes. So even like a small online vendor, would need to be familiar just with that fact, and then with tools to use that. And that small vendor might actually be enlisting the services of one of these third party groups like Avalara to run their deliveries through.
Is it okay to jump in from this chair, Madam Chair? Mm-hmm. One other point I would add, Representatives, is that Wayfair, the Vermont law post Wayfair only requires sales tax collection if you have over 100,000 in sales in the state or 200 transactions.
Great.
So if you're really like one, we're probably not getting taxed on that, and that's actually okay.
Okay.
And we're gonna spend time on Wayfair and the Streamline Sales Agreement. Representative Anthony, Representative Beck, and then we're gonna wrap up this agenda item and spend more time on it when we dive into miscellaneous tax correction issues.
Tangential, Commissioner, to your request to clarify that the tax department has honest ownership for something miscollected. I'm sort of curious if you, post Wayfair, have gotten any signals of folks who are collecting but not remitting. That is to say, the reverse of the I collected but I shouldn't have.
That's fairly rare.
Okay.
Thankfully.
Good.
Usually where we see that is in misapplied exemptions rather than wholesale refusal to collect. I definitely think, especially at the start, there was a ramp up period for this, right? Where medium-sized businesses were not necessarily doing it, but it's honestly difficult for me to think of the last time I ordered something from a website of any size and didn't have it collect sales tax for Vermont, which I'm thankful for.
And remit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Craig addressed my comment.
Oh, cool. Great. Okay. Do you have anything else?
No, that's great.
Great, thank you. And thanks for the tour of the US Post Office.
Yeah.
Ms. Buckley, so nice to have you here with us.
Here, there's a little frog in my throat.
I think this is our first time having someone from the league join us. So we're gonna do a little round of introductions for you.
Sure.
If you don't mind.
Shall I start?
Sure, that sounds good.
Katie Buckley, Vermont League of Cities and Towns. I'm the director of the Federal Funding Assistance Program. And I am delighted to be here today. Thank you.
And I'm Emily Kornheiser. I'm the chair of the committee.
Bill Canfield.
Julia Andrews.
Catherine Sims.
Kevin Haslett. Scott Beck.
Chris Nettles.
Kirk Taylor.
Peter Anthony.
Carolyn Brannigan.
Carol Odie.
Carl Demmer.
Excellent. I know that we're pretty tight for time at this point. How would you like me to proceed? Do you want me to just dive right in and move quickly through my slide deck?
30 minutes.
Oh, okay. Forgive me. And I'm a fast talker in the very best way. So I can move quickly through the slides. So I'm just going to quickly talk about Vermont League of Cities and Towns, local American Rescue Plan Act funding, the standard allowance. Not sure if folks have heard about that at all on your local level, and a little shameless self-promotion for our federal funding assistance program, which does dovetail in. So we'll jump right to that VLCT slide that shows our priorities for this legislative session. You can see revenue is on there for sure. We are 247 municipality member organization. We follow about 300 bills each year. Why so many? You talked about it earlier, Dillon's Rural State. Municipalities are only allowed to do that, which is enabled through statute, which you all create. It's limited in the ways, towns are limited in the ways that they can generate revenue, creates disparity. The small guys get left behind often because they don't have the ability and the local capacity to make meaningful change on the local level. Is there a solution? We think so. Revenue sharing. Other states do it. We'd like to do it too. And local ARPA is a good example that we can start from. So in Vermont, Vermont got $1.25 billion, which I know you all are intimately involved with over the last 2 years. So the state got a little over $1 billion, and communities throughout Vermont got just a little bit over $200 million. And so there was local ARPA money that went out, and there was also county money that went out. And because of our structure of government in Vermont, we don't really have traditional county government. So all of that county money, which was significant for Vermont, $121 million was reallocated using the same formula to Vermont municipalities. Huge. You suddenly had towns with cash in banks that have not gotten funding like this before. It works out to be about $300 per Vermonter. It's easy to do the math. 1,000 people in a community, they got about $300,000. That's real money. Is it enough money to do everything? Absolutely not, but it's a start. If you're curious to know, throughout my slide deck, you'll see blue links, blue language there. It links through to other resource documents if you want to know more information. If you want to know how much money your community got in ARPA funding, you can click that link right there. Local ARPA, it's like a unicorn. It doesn't come often. You might not ever see it again. It's unlike any other federal grant program that is available right now or even in recent history. It's non-competitive. There was no application process. There is a one-size-fits-all grant agreement that everybody got. And I almost want to say that the state got the same grant agreement as Victory, which is the smallest town in Vermont. No public process requirement, which is usually a traditional aspect of federal funding. Towns get cash up front, 2 tranches. First half they got last year in late summer, and in 2021, and then the second tranche, equal amount, came in 2022. There's a protracted timeline for the grant. Performance period concludes December 31st, 2026, a date I'm sure everybody is very familiar with this funding, applies to towns as well. How many eligible municipalities accepted their ARPA funds? All of them, except one. We had them all accepting for 1 week, and then we had one town decide that they did not want their ARPA funds. We had one of the best success rates in the country in terms of the number of communities that accepted ARPA awards, and we had the best and most accurate reporting for the entire country here in Vermont. And I can say that we thank the Vermont legislature and the governor for funding a position to help towns do that work, to really handhold them through the process. So a thanks goes to all of you with that.
And thank you for doing the work.
Love it. Love this work. So ARPA, governed by, there was an interim rule for almost a year, and then there was a final rule that was issued January 6th of last year. Everyone was waiting for the final rule to be issued because you don't want to make a decision on something when you don't actually know what the rules of the road are. So the final rule came, and in it was this one provision called the standard allowance, right? The interim rule had these categories of spending, which were very limited. Most small towns in Vermont were trying to fit square pegs into round holes. But we don't know how to spend our money because we don't have this type of project need. We don't provide this kind of service on the local level. The state more does that. So towns were really struggling on the ways that they were going to spend their money. In the final rule, the standard allowance, if you were able to demonstrate revenue loss through a calculation, you could use it on the provision of government services. And the provision of government services is virtually anything that a town would spend money on in their annual operating budget. Because the calculation was very convoluted and challenging for the smallest communities to perform, there was a big comment period, and that was a big sound that came from rural America was, this is too complicated. Like, we'll give the money back, it's too complicated. So they came up with this standard allowance for revenue loss, which was $10 million. So you could elect the standard allowance up to $10 million, and your ARPA award is revenue replacement or revenue loss. Provision of government services, you don't have to fit the square peg into the round hole anymore. Every town in Vermont, with the exception of Burlington, has an ARPA award less than $10 million. So their entire ARPA award now is revenue loss. And under that category, revenue loss or revenue replacement, as it's officially called, Treasury treats that money as revenue sharing, general revenue. So game changer for Vermont, game changer. Towns now have cash in the bank that they can use in the way that they want to use it. And the very, very, very best part of all of it means they can use it for grant match. I don't know how many of you are from very small communities, but I was originally and worked for a very small community. We could never come up with grant match. We would find great opportunities, but we just didn't have the cash to come up with match. Now that $200 million that's sitting there is $200 million of opportunity, and it can leverage all of those other federal programs that are coming down the pike through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, bipartisan infrastructure law, or any other existing programs that are out there. It is unusual because federal money is typically not used to match other federal money, but in this case, it's allowable because it's general revenue. And so I just want to say it again with feeling, local ARPA can be used as grant match for other federal programs. Huge, huge, huge opportunity for our towns. The next slide, take your time, be patient, think bigger. That's been our message since day one of working with Vermont municipalities. You'll see the little date on that slide is May 2021 when we created it. Leverage your ARPA award. We've told them, wait for the rules to solidify, wait to see how this all shakes out. Start thinking about what you want to do on the local level, start framing up your projects so that you can be ready. A lot of towns, obviously, you don't want to wait until you want to wait until the final rule comes and you know what you're working with. And so towns are now in that process of prioritizing their local needs and framing up projects. In response to that, here's my shameless self-promotion part. Capacity is a major issue. We now have financial capital. We don't have the human capital to pair up with that. These are complicated programs. They're complicated for us to tease out and figure out how to use them. And we work in this realm all the time. Community volunteers, it's a challenge. So in response to that and everything that we learned in doing our ARPA work, we have just recently, like 5 seconds ago, stood up the Federal Funding Assistance Program, which is really like art on steroids, think of it that way. And so we're doing the work of culling all of those 367 federal programs in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the 103 programs that are in the Inflation Reduction Act, sugaring them down and pulling out just the ones that are applicable to Vermont municipalities as eligible applicants, and that makes sense for the scale of Vermont municipality. We are working on that. We create a document. We work very close partnership with the regional planning commissions. And so we do the work, that higher level work of understanding all the federal stuff, create tools, resources that benefit them as well as other municipalities. So we have the Vermont Federal Funding Guidebook. It's available on our website. You click it. It contains all of those programs just for Vermont that I talked about. It's just a funding guide for Vermont. We have a consult on call where municipalities can book an appointment with us, talk about their project. We can help them assemble a model capital stack for their project. If they're ready at that point, give them some ideas on grant funding. I'll give an example. I talked with a town who needs to pave a parking lot yesterday. And by the end of our conversation, I said to her, you are not looking to pave your parking lot. You are looking to solve a stormwater issue. That is very different. And there is a lot of funding for that. So let's focus on that issue and then point them to the RPC. We do a tip of the week.
I can interrupt you for a second. That's one of the sort of key reasons I wanted to have you in to talk about this today, is that as we are having these conversations throughout the session about town revenue, seeing how all of these different pieces can stack together to create a complete picture for municipalities rather than always thinking about these issues in isolation. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So we have lots of tools, lots of resources. We added to the team of one, which was me. We have added Bonnie Wenninger, who was the executive director of the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission, to work alongside me, and the two of us are doing this fantastic work together and very excited to help all of our towns. That is the end of my slide deck, and I'd be happy to take questions or.
I would just like to compliment you on a very pretty slide deck.
Pardon?
It's a very pretty slide deck.
It's colorful.
It's really nice.
For sure. Thanks.
See, Representative Sen.
Yeah. Thanks for this presentation and for all the work that you have done to help support municipalities.
Thanks for letting me do it.
And a lifetime transformational opportunity. I guess I'd be curious to hear you maybe reflect on a few things. One, just even within my communities, towns have approached the sort of how do we identify what our priorities for spending this funding on, like really differently. One community set up a task force and they mailed everyone cards and they asked for ideas and they had a committee that ranked them and gave them to the select board. And another community decided, the select board wanted to retain discretion over the flexibility of spending. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'm curious at your level if you have a sense of sort of the range of ways communities decided to allocate funding and, whether most had a public process or others, just any kind of reflections on how communities made this.
Yeah, of course. It is a wide range. We have everything from just an item on warrant agenda down to a robust, dedicated website with a survey. And it's a full spectrum of community outreach on some level. It's not a requirement of the funding. Typically, it's pretty scripted. You have to have a public meeting. You have to do it within this time frame. These are the points in the process at which you have to. There was none of that. There's no requirement. It was implicit in the rule, but not a requirement. And residents, taxpayers that are not in leadership are not local officials are watching all of this play out in real time, reading it in the news, they're seeing it, they're asking their boards. So some of it's being driven grassroots from the bottom up. And towns that have a robust planning process, there are towns who have a very robust planning process. They have a town plan, they have done plan studies, they have a capital plan. So they're looking to now execute those things that have been sitting there that they haven't been able to execute because they haven't had the money to do so.
Well, I want to hear you reflect a little bit more on like the kind of capacity piece. I hear and I've experienced myself in my own communities that sometimes coming up with the idea and doing the scoping and the feasibility work and writing and like just having that shovel-ready project takes an enormous amount of capacity that some communities do and don't have. And so I wondered if you had like any specific examples about the sort of ways the communities could take advantage of this opportunity and how it might be different if you have a town manager, for example, or if you don't, or any kind of specific examples of the capacity barrier.
I also want to say it takes, in addition to the people component, it takes a lot of time to stand up a project. So, you mentioned different phases of the project there, feasibility, scoping, all of those things. It takes generally about a year or two to get a project shovel ready. And so when you get this funding, you don't have a project, you have to go through this entire process, you're pretty flat-footed. So it feels like towns are slow to arriving at the party, and they're really not. They are having to play catch up. Never does money arrive. You always chase the money. You come up with all of that, and then you go figure out the funding piece. Now they have the funding piece. It's just backwards. And so towns that do have staff, like paid staff, not a town clerk who's an elected official who is paid and is a professional person. It is not an elected official staff, town managers, town administrators, a person that is there dedicated to similar type work. They're doing better because they have that position. That's a reality. And I'm biased, I will just say, as a town administrator. And so this moment, I would have loved this moment.
And so, as you mentioned, this is a unicorn moment where we had, tremendous federal stimulus. But I'm curious if, you all were able to stand up a program and really help support municipalities in a new and different way. Are there some lessons learned that even though we're not going to have this avalanche of federal funding forever, that we might want to carry forward that would be impactful even in more baseline times?
It shined a spotlight for sure. And it's short game, long game. How do we deploy all of this funding quickly by 2026 with regard to ARPA, right? And hopefully they bump that date out, but that's all beyond our control in this room. And I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit there.
What are some lessons learned, like that we might want to carry forward beyond just this ARPA moment?
Staff capacity, for sure. It's hard to carry out federally funded projects with community volunteers. It exposed a real lack of capacity in the financial realm for municipal finance. So we actually brought on a government finance specialist, and we are working on that. That's the long game piece. So we have towns that are across the board in how they both manage their books, but also too in their level of understanding about government finance, especially as it relates to grants. So this is a teaching moment. So how can we use this moment to accomplish as much as we can, but also strengthen local government so that they can use these tools that are always there, just in lower dollar amounts, to help advance their local priorities. It's a great teaching moment. I'm a glass half full kind of person, just so you know. So yeah, I think we have opportunity to strengthen local government like never before right now, but we have to sustain that.
I don't want to throw a wet blanket on all this, but some of the towns in my district and around my district are finding that even with the ARPA money that they've got, it's still not even anywhere enough to address some of the infrastructure issues that they have with town garages, with town buildings, and what I'm seeing in them is a lot of folks who are just kind of at the end of their rope with trying to figure out how to get these projects done without having to force a whole bunch of people to leave town with tax rates for bonding for the rest of it. And I'm just interested in some point talking with you about that and how how the capacity program that you've got at VL.
Yeah, my shameless self-promotion is I'm hoping you'll share it back with your communities and drive them to us. Because the town garage is another paving example. Is it a town garage project or is it a water quality issue project because you have a salt shed there, right? I've done project development, Bonnie's done project development, so we are able to know the nuances of the funding and how to frame your project so that you can access more funds. And that takes a long time to build that up, that skill set up. And if your business is a road foreman, you're not going to be, that's not what you do on a daily basis. So we want to help people that are doing these. And I talk to a lot of road foremen because in a lot of communities, they need a new town garage badly. And so let's figure out, is there funding available for that? Because it's not actually a town garage project. It is on its face to your residents. But when it comes to funding, there are probably 3 or 4 different stories you can tell about that project that will be gateways to other funding sources. Maybe, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's the whole piece of applying. So creating a competitive grant application. And there are tools.
Which none in town of 700 does not have the staff to do.
But we can connect with resources for that. And RPCs are a great partner organization to us with that. We've worked straight through ARPA, linked arm in arm, VLCT with the RPCs, for sure. And I think
Let's talk sometime.
you have my contact information on the last slide. Mm-hmm.
Thanks. I'd love at some point in the future to talk about what towns spend money on when they do have money to spend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Representative Maslin.
Yeah, thank you. You may have heard from Thetford. I don't know if you have or not. Thetford has an unusual situation where in the bridge between Thetford and Lyme is going to be closed for 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to impact businesses and a whole bunch of things, maybe longer than 18 months. They said, what money is available for helping businesses? I said, call you.
Actually,
I don't know if you or Gwen have heard from Thetford. But I mean, you ought to deal directly with the select board and town manager, but if you want to tell me anything, that's fine too, you know.
are you working with your regional development corp? Are the businesses working with the RDC in that town? And it's Lyme, New Hampshire, correct?
Lyme, New Hampshire and Thetford, Vermont.
Okay. Who owns the bridge?
New Hampshire. They own the river, they own the bridge.
You just have them call and we'll noodle through some ideas with them.
Okay.
Where we don't directly work with businesses, we're a member organization, so the municipality
That
is
was
who
my
I would.
understanding.
Yeah, we're having to turn a lot of people away.
Something you can do to help you.
Yeah, so most of the people booking appointments in our consults on call, self-booking app there have been local nonprofits looking for help. That's hard to say no.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is, you're confirming what I think I know, but thank you.
Karen, is there anything you want to add? This is your first time in the room this session, so just wanted a chance for you to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you. I'm Karen Horn with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. I'm the Director of Public Policy, and you'll see me in the building along with Katie likely. Also, Gwen Zacco works with me, and she'll be in here a lot. So I think that's probably it for now. Thank you, because Katie's done a fabulous job, and Katie is so much better with PowerPoint.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes, really appreciate it.
And if you have any follow-up questions or need any additional information or materials, you know how to reach me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, we will be back here after lunch at 1 o'clock. Thanks for a really solid morning. 1:15. At 1:15. See, the agenda changes so often that my paper copy does not keep up.